Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Oh Yum 201. I'm really excited about today because we're making lemon meringue pie, and this is one of those recipes I'd say it's definitely in my top 10, if not top 5 recipes that I am asked questions about. There is a lot going on when it comes to making lemon meringue pie because we are making a pie pastry, we are making a lemon curd filling, we are making a meringue. So it's such a popular dessert, especially if you live in this hemisphere. It's a springtime recipe. But you're involving 3 distinct areas of the pastry kitchen and 3 different skills and lots of little tricky business when it comes to lemon meringue pie. So I am here to answer your questions as we walk through my classic lemon meringue pie recipe together. And I see lots of hellos coming in from everyone. You know I have to start things off with hellos to Mom, Dad, and Michino. I see Kathy and Raph. Bonnie, I know you're watching and hopefully excited about getting a slice of this when I walk it down the street later. I'm just going to click refresh so that I can follow your questions as we work along. And I think we're running full on. Hello to Istanbul, Dubai, Sharon, Ontario, Ojai, California, from Greece. I think it's amazing that everyone is joining us. And so I'm going to start this lemon meringue pie recipe with the pie dough. Now, if you have followed my live streams or the OEM channel before, you will find this recipe in a few places. It is such a fundamental recipe, it's worth repeating. I won't dwell on it too very much, but I want to walk you through the step-by-step of making a really good pie dough. Suzanne, if you're watching, you know Courtney loves making this pie dough recipe, and it's got its own couple of tricks to it too. Now, something to bear in mind, this recipe that you see below the video window makes a 2-crust pie, because I figure if you're going through the effort of making pie dough, might as well make a full double crust pie recipe. You only need the 1 pie shell, 1 disc of dough for this recipe. You can freeze the other one, just thaw it in the fridge overnight before you use it. I've already got my all-purpose flour in my mixing bowl, and I'm adding my tablespoon of sugar and teaspoon of salt, just a little bit of sugar. It helps interrupt the protein, the gluten strands, keeping the dough tender. I'll just give that a quick stir to work in. You know me so well that I add salt to the flour, but yet when it comes to the butter I use in the recipe, I use unsalted butter. Why? Because that way we stay in charge of the salt. It's plain and simple. I love the freshness and sweetness of unsalted butter, but before I add the butter, my ingredient that I find really helps keep this pie dough recipe flaky yet tender at the same time is coating the flour first with 3 tablespoons, that's 45 ml, because I know in Australia your tablespoon size is actually bigger than ours here in North America. So 45 ml of just a neutral vegetable oil. Don't use olive oil, just a good vegetable oil. And we're gonna work this in. This coats the flour so that when you add the butter and work it in, it works in evenly, but the key is to protect it so when you add the water, which the water wants to go into the flour and hydrate it, and that creates a stretchy dough, one that will spring back or not roll easily. You've protected it by putting this vegetable oil, this liquid fat, on the flour. It doesn't look any different once you've mixed it in, and you can do this by hand just using a wooden spoon if you wish. Oh, Hermione, good question. You need all-purpose flour for this recipe, so nothing too strong. You don't want a bread flour or it'll be a tough crust. And you can use pastry flour, but it can have a tendency to crack or be almost too delicate. So something right in the middle does the trick. And I'm just checking out other questions. You can make this, Kim, good question. Yes, you can definitely make this pie crust recipe by hand. You want to use a pastry blender if you can. This is a handy tool. It looks like this. And so it works in the butter when you add it to the flour and breaks it down into pieces very easily. Barring that, you can use 2 butter knives, but it takes a fair bit longer. Now, a little tip. If you've been taught how to make a classic pie pastry, you've probably been taught that the butter has to be ice cold. In fact, maybe even put it in the freezer for an hour before you use it. I have learned, and I prefer, to use butter that has actually sat out anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. Now, of course, this depends on your climate, the time of year, and how cool it is. We're still very cool here in southern Ontario, and hello to Niagara Falls, New York, just across the river. I saw your note pop up earlier, but I like to soften the butter just a little bit because then it's going to take less time and less effort to work it into the flour. So I would rather you not take as long and then not overwork the flour using ice cold butter. And honestly, it will work out more evenly so you don't get that mix of big pieces and little pieces as you're cutting in the flour. And it'll take a fraction of the time. So while you're working in your butter, I can see right now I have still big pieces. And you can probably see from the side or the top of the bowl, the flour still has a natural white color to it. As the butter gradually works itself in, it takes on a butter yellow color. And that's your indicator. That's your visual cue that the butter is likely worked in enough. So then you want to have your cool water and your lemon juice or white vinegar ready. I'm just going to let this go for another second, and I'll show you what the texture of the flour looks like. I will say, I have put this recipe through its paces so many times. I have intentionally overworked the dough, worked in the butter far too much. I have worked with ice cold butter. I've worked with soft butter. This recipe has a lot of forgiveness to it. And I think part of that also is to do with the precision in the measurements. A lot of pie dough recipes, when it comes time to add the liquid, will tell you, oh, add between 5 and 10 tablespoons or 5 and 9 tablespoons of water. Well, we're bakers. We like our precision. So why, with the pie dough recipe, are we not all of a sudden not committing to a water measurement? And how are you supposed to know? Do I need 5 or do I need 9? How do I know? I have committed to a 1/4 cup, so 60 ml of cool water and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice or white vinegar. The acidity helps keep that dough elastic. The proteins in the flour stretch easily, so you won't get spring back on your crust. It'll stay in place. And like the butter, you don't need ice cubes in your water, just nice, cool water. Now let's take a look at our mixture. Knowing that we will be blending this dough again when we add the liquid, we've got sort of a delicate crumb structure, but you still have some visible pieces of butter, but they're about 1/3 or 1/4 of the size as to the size they went in. So just tiny little broken down pieces. And now it's time to add the water and lemon juice. I'll pour one into the other. I figure I'm using lemon juice. This is lemon meringue pie, but if you want to use vinegar, it's absolutely fine. It makes no difference. I'll add that all at once. And just wait for the dough to come together. How's everyone doing? I see we're already up to 192 likes. That's excellent. And we've got a good crowd watching. I appreciate you joining us from wherever you are. Maybe you're staying up late or you're up very early. I'm just checking out to see that if we have any pie dough related questions. CJ is asking, they've never made pie crust in the stand mixer. It is very easy to do by using the stand mixer. As you can see, I did it in under 10 minutes while talking at the same time. So I know you've got this. After it comes out of the mixer, as soon as you see it comes together, Then you want to pull it from the mixer. Oh, I should mention, if you want to use a food processor, you can. That is the one exception, that you should use cold butter right from the fridge, because the friction of the food processor blade warms up that dough very quickly. So once you have your dough together, you will find it feels soft, because don't forget that butter was a little bit soft. So now we need to chill it to make it easy to handle, but also to allow time for the proteins in the flour to relax so that we have a nice tender crust that rolls easily. Oh, I've got mine here. We've got my sweetie Michael running the cameras. He's also the fridge errand person today. And so I already pulled out my dough. These I would wrap and pop in the fridge. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, the recipe makes enough for a double crust pie, if that's what you're after. Be right back. But we're only using a single crust. So just like, oh, Allison is asking a great question. Any gluten-free ideas? For a pie crust, you will find I have a gluten-free pie crust recipe right here on OYum. If you look up my pear cranberry pie recipe, that is a gluten-free crust, so you could use that crust in this lemon meringue pie recipe, because there is no additional flour or gluten in the filling or the meringue, so you would be good to go. That's a really great point. And Julie's asking the same question. If you have a gluten-free flour blend that you like, I would give it a try. Here's the gluten-free little hot tip for today when you're making a pie crust. Instead of adding water, I want you to add the same volume, so that would be 2 large egg whites, 60 milliliters of egg white in place of the water, because egg whites are pure protein, so that the moisture will bring your dough together. You will find you have to gently roll the crust, but you will be able to line your pie shell. It won't shrink because there's no gluten, but you will find because of the egg whites in place of the water, you get a nice crispness and your pie crust holds together. That is key to the success when you're making a gluten-free pie crust. So great questions to be asking. All right. Oh, Jacqueline's asking a question. So no egg with my water and lemon and vinegar. For this recipe, no, I don't. I used to put an egg in the recipe, but again, sometimes I found I got a little more spring from it. And the French method for making a pie dough, or they call it a pâte brisée, is simply the flour and the butter with the water to moisten it along with the acidity. So just like the butter I used when I was making my pie dough, that I let it soften up for a few minutes. When it comes to the pie crust, I pulled the dough out about 15 to 20 minutes before I wish to roll it, for that exact same reason. Ice cold butter from the fridge, doesn't matter how good your pie dough recipe is, it will crack when you start rolling it. And because this is such a butter-rich dough, there's not the sugar in it to sort of liquefy and soften, and you definitely don't want to knead this dough when you start rolling it. It may crack a little bit, so when you start rolling, start with little motions, starting in the center just to stretch it out. Get it used to being rolled out thin. And now, if you're going to get a crack when you're rolling out a pie dough, it's going to start where you can't see it from the bottom, because all the pressure when you're rolling out a crust is coming from the top. And so this cold dough will sort of pull away from the bottom. So a good little tip is always take a minute. See, there's the beginning of a crack. Flip your dough over, and now you're evening out the pressure. And you can flip it over again. But I think we always think about rotating our dough, but we never think about flipping it over. And then it also means you're evening out your flour distribution. You're dusting on the bottom and the top. So your pin won't stick and the dough won't stick. And I just keep rotating the dough 45 degrees as I roll. And now I'm favoring this side of my pin as I put pressure and rotate to keep the dough in a circle shape and keep the pressure even as it rolls out. And now you can see some little flat pieces of butter. These aren't chunks of butter in the dough. These are flat sheets of butter within there. That's going to contribute to the flakiness. So don't worry if you see a couple little pieces of flat dough in there. You're on your way to a flaky, flaky dough. But also, at the same time, if you don't see those little butter pieces, don't panic about that either. So I'm rolling this out to just shy of a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters thick. And I want a little bit extra for overhang. I'm going to flip this over one more time. So a few natural cracks at the outside edge are expected. And you know what? It happens to everybody. If you get a few cracks in your dough when you're rolling and they happen in the center, you just do what we all do. You pinch it back together, give it a little dusting with flour, and away you go. So now I'm ready to line my pie shell. Now I tend to favor a glass pie shell when I'm making a fruit pie or a lemon meringue pie. Now glass conducts heat so wonderfully. So it does take a little while to heat up, but once it gets warm, wow, it holds the heat. And that's why it works so well for a pie, because the heat from that glass is kind of cooking the pie shell like it's its own heating element. And so if you're making a fruit pie, you know you're getting the crust set while the fruit inside is just starting to cook. And if that shell is cooking faster than the fruit, you know the fruit liquids won't seep through the crust. For a lemon meringue pie, we need to blind bake this. We need to fully bake the pie shell first because it doesn't spend enough time in the oven when it's filled to fully cook it. So the first thing I'm going to do is pinch the edges of the crust, give it a nice little pattern. And this isn't just about making it look pretty. The function of this is to kind of latch the pastry onto the pie shell so that it stays in place when it bakes, especially when it blind bakes. So I'm just tucking in the edges here, and I think I can do this and read questions at the same time. Oh, Finn is asking a good question, and I think this applies to lemon desserts in general, when to add lemon zest and when to add lemon juice. So as more of a philosophical question, lemon zest is what adds intense lemon flavor to your lemon desserts. And the juice typically adds just a light tartness, but not the lemon flavor. And so when it comes to adding that lemon ingredient, when I add lemon zest, if it's a cake or a cookie or a mousse, I add the zest early on so that it has time to extract the flavor. And then the lemon juice usually gets added at the very end. Now this lemon meringue pie doesn't actually make use of lemon zest at all because you want the smoothness of the custard without the interruption of little lemon zest pieces in there. But we rely on a large quantity of lemon juice to get this recipe right. So I've got my shell shaped, and if you want to use a fork or you've got a pastry crimper, you can use that. I'm just going to do an angled effect with my 2 fingers. And this too is securing the crust in place. So with every pull, I'm pressing it onto that top edge of the pie shell so that as it bakes, it stays in place. Now this step of the recipe, if you want to serve your lemon meringue pie tomorrow, you want to be making your pie dough, giving it time to chill in the fridge, rolling and baking the shell a day before. It really does help you to get ahead, to do that a day before. And then the filling and the meringue is best assembled the day you plan on serving it. So if you're serving it for dinner tomorrow night, you want to do your filling and meringue in the morning to give the pie time to cool. So at this point, I want to, because I've rolled and exercised the dough again, I want to pop this in the fridge, minimum half an hour, but again, you could do this well ahead of time to let the butter reset, the proteins relax. And with the magic of Michael, we're going to, ta-da, swap for the one that I already have cooled So now it is really set in place. I am not going to bake this right now because I have my oven set for the meringue, which is at a different temperature. But I just want to show you a great little trick. So to bake this pie shell, you want to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. We want a hot oven to let the heat really get in there and set the pie shell. We don't want that butter melting and then the shape of your pie shell changing too much. But you have to blind bake any pie shell that has a previously cooked filling. So a coconut cream, banana cream, chocolate cream, all the creams and your lemon meringue, you need to fully pre-cook your shell. If you were to just put it in the oven like this, well, you would get a big bubble in the top of it, and then your sides might slide a little bit because the filling acts as an anchor. So you kind of have to trick your pie shell, and this is why it's called blind baking, because you're hiding it. You can't see the pie shell, and we're faking a filling. So I have 2 pieces of tin foil, and I want to press that well into the side edges. I always use 2 because if you use 1, you'll get a tear, and then all of a sudden, whatever you're using to weigh down your pie will leak onto the pie shell. You can use raw beans, you can use raw rice. If you have ceramic pie weights, those are great because they hold the heat. And you know what interestingly also works? Good old granulated sugar. And this is sugar that I repeatedly use for blind making my pie shells. I think this is about its 3rd use. And you'll notice with each repeated use, the sugar, now sugar of course you know gets very hot in the heat of the oven. So it's helping cook the pie crust not from the top too. You've got the heat source from the bottom. The sugar itself is heating the pie pastry. But slowly over repeated use, the sugar will caramelize a little bit. So you can completely use this sugar in your baking in other recipes. After you find, you've done or you're tired of storing it in the cupboard. So this replaces the weight you would normally have apples or strawberry rhubarb or peaches. And I'm going to pop this in the oven for 20 minutes at 400 degrees. Then after 20 minutes, you slide this out of the oven. And then this is why I like to use tin foil, because it does not conduct the heat. So you can do this with your bare fingers. And you remove this again. It will be very, very hot. And you continue to bake this for another 8 to 10 minutes. And that's to set the bottom of the shells. You'll find the edges are already set, and then the bottom will be set. After that, you let it cool completely, and it's time to fill. So I'll have you pop that back in the fridge, Michael. Thank you. So how are we doing? Can I start the lemon filling? Oh, and Kirsty's asking a good question. Do I have to dock the bottom of the pie shell before I bake? I do that with a sweet dough because I don't blind bake it. I don't weight it down. Because I'm weighing this pastry down, I don't find I need to blind bake it. The weight holds the base in place. I also find with pie pastry, it doesn't expand the same way the sweet dough does to fill in where I docked the pastry. Oh, and that was a great question to ask, Kirsty. Let me bring up a last point. I'm going to show you the pastry that I already baked. So we've got a pie shell ready to fill right here. And as soon as your pie shell comes out of the oven, before you let it cool, take an egg white, lightly whisk it, and with a pastry brush, brush the entire bottom and sides with the egg white. The heat of the pastry shell will cook that sheer layer of egg white onto the pastry, and that is your waterproof barrier to keep your nice, soft lemon meringue pie filling from seeping into the pastry too quickly. Ultimately, after 3 to 4 days, yes, it will happen, but this really gives you a good barrier so that you maintain a crisp and flaky crust under the lemon meringue pie filling. Then it will cool and it's ready to fill. So let me pull my ingredients. Before you start your lemon meringue filling, a couple of things to bear in mind. You are going to want to make your nice tart lemon filling and then your meringue immediately afterwards. Usually we're so used to waiting for each step of a recipe having to cool completely before the next step. you want to apply a meringue onto a warm lemon filling. So have all your ingredients ready. I separated my egg yolks ahead of time, so I protected them so they didn't dry out. I've got my 6 egg yolks, and I've already set aside 4 whites for the meringue on top of the pie from these yolks. I've got my cornstarch, water, lemon juice, and butter. So the egg yolks, lemon juice, and butter get added second, but I have right now my 1 cup of sugar, and I'll add to that my cornstarch. And of course, the full recipe is below the screen. If you can't see it, hit the show more button, and it'll pop right up for you. It's a humid day here in Southern Ontario. There we go, get that cornstarch out. I'll give this a quick stir and then add 1 cup of water. So this is not a typical lemon curd for a French style lemon tart that you do stovetop, whisking your egg yolks and lemon juice and sugar and melted butter together. This is your North American lemon meringue pie, so that filling has a lot of volume to it, and that's why you have to add the water. Now, the reason I am not adding the lemon juice now is for 2 reasons. I don't want to lose that fresh lemon flavor, so I don't want the lemon juice to be cooking for 3 to 4 minutes. And I'm just going to get the heat going on my stove. There we go. But additionally, and this is the key to understanding what happens to lemon meringue pie as it sits in your fridge, lemon juice and cornstarch don't actually like hanging out together. They're the 2 key ingredients for this filling, but after a while, the thickening power of cornstarch breaks down in the presence of the acidity of the lemon juice, which is why if you ever have a little bit of leftover lemon meringue pie and you go to the fridge the next day and there's a little puddle sitting in the bottom of the pie plate, that's the liquid coming out of your lemon filling because the cornstarch is breaking down. Is there a fix? Yes, you can use what is called modified cornstarch. That's what commercial bakeries use, and you'll see that their lemon meringue pie doesn't weep, but nor does it have that nice homemade texture to it. It's a bit thicker and gloppier. It almost has a sheer look to it. And I have tried playing with other starches like tapioca starch and arrowroot, and you don't get the right set. The texture is not sliceable once it's chilled. So what I'm going to do is I want to bring this mixture of sugar, water, and cornstarch up to a boil. Terribly uninteresting. It is not going to look exciting. Right now it's cloudy. You'll know that your cornstarch is fully thickened because it will go from cloudy to clear. It will have to be bubbling, and I'm going to get a trivet so I can bring my pot back over here to add my remaining ingredients. So this will take a couple minutes. You want to whisk regularly, but you don't have to whisk too vigorously. We're not making a mousse here. So while that's heating up, and we've got plenty of time, let me take a few questions. A substitute. Renata's asking about a substitute for cream of tartar. When you're whipping your egg whites, you can replace that half a teaspoon of cream of tartar, Renata, with white vinegar or lemon juice. It's the acidity. Cream of tartar is simply acidity in a powder form, and that allows your egg whites to stretch to a bigger volume. So that's why we use it there. So any acidity will do the trick. Great question. Danny's asking, does this pie crust recipe work for tartlets? It sure does. And depending on that tart recipe, you still have to blind bake it. If you're putting in a cooked filling, say you're doing mini quiche, you can partially blind bake. So the step to fully blind bake, I baked with the weights on for 20 minutes, then took the weights off and baked for 10 minutes. If you're filling it with a quiche or another filling that's going to go back in the oven, then you pull the weights off and pull the pan out of the oven because it will go back into the oven to continue cooking. That's a great question. Ahmad, hi Ahmad, is asking, can you use rice starch? I haven't tested with rice starch. I would be leery. I find that this classic lemon meringue pie, that sliceable filling and the right texture and mouthfeel, you know, when you take a bite and it's there and you get the burst of fresh lemon juice and then it melts away, cornstarch really is the ideal starch. Let me tell you, when I tried with the tapioca starch, the word slime comes to mind, and that is not a word any of us want to have our friends and family describe our desserts as slimy. And I love all the sort of great textured things like nata, the coconut gel, and aloe, and tapioca pearls. I love all those slippery, starchy good things, but in a lemon meringue pie, that's not what we're after. Ahmad's asking, can you replace the lemon with calamansi, that delicious, tiny, super tart lime? 100%. A calamansi meringue pie would be absolutely delicious. And so I would use the same volume as lemon juice called for in this recipe, that half a cup. Hello to Kelby from Missouri. And, good question, Sue. Do you have to roll the pastry thinner for tartlets? Yes, a little bit thinner, just so that whatever you put in, the filling you put in, you don't overwhelm it with just a big piece of pastry. So that's a very good question to ask. I love these questions coming in. Oh, and a good question from Chris. How many lemons does it take to make half a cup of juice? It really depends on your lemons and the time of year, but I find you can really get about half a cup here. This is in Canada, and so that means our lemons are coming from Florida or Mexico, Central America, where you're looking at about 3 good-sized lemons to produce that fresh lemon juice. And I swear by fresh lemon juice, when you're making a dessert like lemon meringue pie, it's all about the lemon. And if you're using bottled lemon juice, it usually has an added preservative to give it shelf life, and you can sometimes taste that a little bit in the aftertaste. All right, I'm getting some steam, but I haven't thickened up yet here with my filling, so I'll take a couple of questions. Oh, and we've got Tammy has a big question. Oh, not a question, just a big thank you. Well, much appreciated, Tammy. Thank you for reaching out and saying hello. Joyce is asking, how do I make the meringue successfully? Oh, I'm gonna do a whole little piece on meringues as soon as I get this filling done. So stay with me, Joyce. And we've got a lot of people watching. We've got over 300 views. Now I have to confess, you know I like to hit 500 before I announce something. And we've got the wonderful Rob is moderating our chat thread today, and we were talking about what should be the next live stream. So I have to head out of town a little bit because I'm working on a new project for Oh Yum, a different production. But I should have the capabilities to do a Q&A session live, and that would be sometime in May. So you got to give me a couple of weeks, and stay tuned to this channel. Subscribe if you're not already, so that you can be updated and know, because then I will be devoted to watching and answering your baking questions, because this is why these live streams are so much fun. I'm not just, you know, you can watch me make a lemon meringue pie anytime, but this is our chance to connect as bakers and talk. And John's asking a good question. What is the best meringue for lemon squares? Now that's where I vary. It depends on the base, but if you're doing a lemon meringue square, you're going to want to use a Swiss or an Italian meringue, which is pre-cooked and is a little firmer and a little bit sweeter. And I'll touch on that more. So are you on the sauce cam right now? Look at that strange, clear, thickened liquid. We've got bubbles happening. So now this is where we want to add our egg yolks, and we have to be pretty quick about this. This is a very hot liquid, and I'm tempering this thick gooey liquid into the eggs. And now that I've added about half of that liquid, I'll add everything back to the pot. whisk it in, and I'll take it back to the heat for just a minute, and I'll also bring over my lemon juice, and the butter I will add back here. So as you can see, it's the egg yolks, not the lemon, that make your lemon meringue pie filling a beautiful lemony yellow. It also serves to thicken up a little bit. And I'm just going to give this a moment over the heat. Grab my fresh lemon juice. So I just want the heat of the stove. I'm going to turn down the heat a little bit. So the egg yolks are cooking out now, and I'm adding the lemon juice. And I just need this to return to a simmer, but I don't want it to cook too long because I don't want to cook out that fresh lemon flavor. So it's just needing to sort of heat up to bond with the other ingredients, and then it'll be ready to come off the heat. Won't take, I can feel it. You don't want to be distracted, unlike I am right now, having a little visit with you. But you actually want to, you'll feel it through, in your hand, through the whisk when it starts to thicken up a little bit. Almost there. When you start to see just a couple bubbles break the surface, you know everything is fully cooked. There we go. And off it comes. So the final addition is just a little bit of butter. The butter doesn't add anything. I mean, it adds a lovely taste and it thickens a little bit. But just like when you're making a pastry cream, the function of the butter at this point is to actually cool it down just a little bit so that your filling doesn't continue to cook in the pot. So once this has melted, we're going to pour it directly into our cooled pie shell. Remember, there's that egg white coating, because typically if you're making a cream pie, you cool your filling before you put it into your pie shell. But not here. We want to work with this warm. And in it goes. Now just keep in mind how hot that filling is. And we still want to work with it while it is warm. But this is where the conversation between the filling and the meringue comes into place. So part of the reason we want to work with this warm is if you let it cool completely or chill, and then you put the meringue on and put it in the oven, you will develop a condensation from the cold filling under the room temperature meringue going into the oven, and that creates a slippery meringue that slides off the top of your lemon meringue pie. Now this will develop a skin if you just leave it. So whether it's plastic or I've got a little piece of parchment, I'm just going to set that on top of the filling to keep it warm and to keep that layer soft while we make our meringue. We're on the home stretch here. And we're doing pretty good on the likes, 349. You know I like to see 500 likes. This is lemon meringue pie. Come on, give me a thumbs up. We've got lots of people watching. It's great to see you joining us from around the world. Oh, Allison, how do we keep that meringue from weeping? I'm going to walk you through a whole bunch of steps. Oh, Juna, hello. Nice to see you join us. It's been a little while. So as a note, I've got my 4 egg whites. I had to think how many for a second there. And this is my icing sugar and my granulated sugar. And I just realized I forgot to pull out my cream of tartar, which I have right here. And I'll add my ½ teaspoon of cream of tartar. As I mentioned earlier, you could use the same measure of a little lemon juice or white vinegar. The idea is to make those egg whites as elastic as they can be. Egg whites at room temperature, whipped to a higher volume. Make sure your bowl is nice and clean. This is not a task you want to do by hand. And just as a note, I am making a French meringue. So, bakers, we know you've got your French, your Swiss, and Italian. French is simply egg whites whisked with sugar. Swiss, you warm your egg whites and dissolve the sugar. If you watched my Swiss method for making macaron, that was 4 weeks ago. That's the method I use. Or you've got the Italian meringue, which is where you boil your sugar and add that to your whipping egg whites. The Italian is the most stable. The Swiss is nice and glossy. The French is mild and airy and light. The reason I use a French meringue as opposed to a Swiss or Italian, which is pre-cooked, is it takes triple the quantity of sugar in a Swiss or Italian to give it that structure and volume. And I find it just ends up being too sweet as a dessert. I like the fluffy, light airiness of the French meringue. What it means is because a French meringue is not pre-cooked, we have to bake it in the oven. So make sure you have your oven preheated to 325 Fahrenheit, that's 160 Celsius. If you've got a fan setting, as low a fan setting as you can or no fan at all, because we want to cook this meringue all the way through. So the cream of tartar is in there. Another key to a successful meringue, and Allison, to your point, all of these little points are about making a meringue that will stay in place, hold its volume, not weep, on top of your delicious lemon filling that you just went through all that work to make. So a medium peak is what we want, not a stiff peak, because we want room for that meringue to grow in the heat of the oven. If we whip to the highest volume, it will then grow too far and then risk collapsing and shrinking too much on us. I've got the combination of granulated sugar and icing sugar for a specific reason. Icing sugar has a small percentage of cornstarch added to it, and cornstarch holds in moisture. And so I find that's just a little bit of help to keep the moisture in your meringue and not weep out. If you see condensation droplets on top of your lemon meringue pie, that's actually sugar pulling away from the meringue. And that's another reason why you don't want to over whip your egg whites, which is why I'm going to slow my mixer down now. And so you can add them in any order you wish. But in goes the icing sugar. And slowly add your granulated so that it has a chance to dissolve fully as you're whipping. And as I mentioned, our goal is a medium peak here. Oh, hello, Denny from Singapore. Nazira, Anna, Ahmad again. If I use Swiss or Italian, do you have to bake it? Great question, Ahmad. So yes, you can use a Swiss or Italian if you wish. So as a warning, just know it is quite sweet, but you don't have to bake it in the oven. You can just use a butane torch, if you have it, a kitchen torch, to torch the top of it for that meringue color. But because you've heated your egg whites already, they are fully cooked. So that's a very good question to ask. Alden is asking, can you substitute the pie shell with a crumb crust? You can, but remember a crumb crust is very delicate, so it suits a filling that's got a little density to it. It can work, but it might be fragile. If you are fond of white chocolate, maybe a thin layer of white chocolate along the bottom will just give it a bit of structure. And yes, you would have to pre-bake the crumb crust. 10 minutes in a 350 or 180 Celsius oven will do the trick. I'm just checking on my egg whites here. I'm going to give them another second, 5 seconds, just to bring them up a little bit. So don't worry, Allison. Everything we're doing here is about trying to prevent the weeping or the condensation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whip enough egg whites, you start to get to know what they look like before you even check them. There. So we've still got some movement. They're nice and glossy, full volume. So let's add this to the top of our pie. So the next step in terms of making a meringue topping that doesn't separate, weep, or become too condensed over top, or let off too much condensation, is to apply the meringue in 2 steps. So first, I'm going to dollop half of the meringue on my pie very, very gently. Remember, this filling is hot. It's also quite fluid at this point. It needs to be fully chilled to set up. Okay. Now, gently, you want to cover the top of the meringue completely. And this is important to help prevent that condensation layer between the filling and the top of the meringue. You want to latch that meringue onto the outside pie shell. So this secures the meringue in place. Now it will expand and it will contract a little bit in the oven. That's basic science. It is out of your control. So we're just trying to use the tools we have to compensate for that. So making sure that it's actually touching the pie crust helps lock this onto the top of the pie. Take your time here, because you will feel the jiggle of that lemon filling underneath. There we go. So it's flat and it's level. Now, a little trick I've picked up is to take a bamboo skewer, you can use a paring knife, and I just draw a few little hooks. And I'm not trying to blend the meringue filling with the lemon, or the meringue with the lemon filling, but I'm just pulling that meringue into the filling a little bit to create another little latch so that that meringue stays in place on top of the lemon filling when it goes in and out of the oven, and then it cools and then it chills completely. So now that I have the lemon filling completely covering, I can put on the remaining meringue on top of the pie. And I'm using the 4 egg whites because I find if I were to do a meringue with 6, it can be a little overwhelming. And while it looks stunning in photos, it can be a lot to manage in terms of enjoying eating it. But if you're going for the looks, go for the show, then you can use 6 egg whites. Don't forget to increase your sugar and icing sugar by 50% if you're doing that. You need that same proportion of the ratio of sugar to egg whites. So now, this top layer is easier to spread on because the base layer is locked into place. And I'm going for sort of that traditional lemon meringue pie look. You can pipe if you wish, once you've got that base layer on. And then I'm just going to give the pie a little texture with some swirls and swishes. This is all for looks, nothing technical here. Now, the key is in your 160 oven or 350 Fahrenheit, this bakes for 20 minutes. We need to cook that meringue fully. Remember, unlike a Swiss or an Italian, this has had no heat contact yet. So we really want to set it. It gives the crust a final set with the filling in it, but don't forget you've got that egg white layer in there. So in this goes until it's lightly browned on top. After it comes out of the oven, I am going to set my timer. There we go. After it comes out, this is the critical point when it comes to a lemon meringue pie that does not weep, meaning you get those droplets on the top surface of it. You have to let the pie cool completely to room temperature, and you'll be amazed how hot this pie is. You can feel from the bottom of the pie plate. It can take 2 hours for it to cool to room temperature, and then you want to chill it. So as I mentioned, and here we've got one. I made this morning. Ta-da! You've got to plan your sort of time backwards accordingly. So I made this first thing this morning. I let it cool. Admittedly, I only cooled it for an hour before I put it in the fridge because I knew I wanted to slice it in time for our live stream. And so I've got a slight bit of condensation. That is my own fault from putting it in the fridge before it cooled completely. So warm pie, cold fridge, condensation. That's what happens. I don't have the big sugar droplets. So condensation is just sort of that light shininess. When you see those big syrupy droplets come out, that is a sign that you over whipped your egg whites. So it's 2 different things. So now it's time to slice our pie. We've got, oh, lots of hearts and loves and oh yeah, because it's lemon meringue pie. Oh, Dala, you're asking, can I make the curd without eggs? You can make a curd without eggs, but you're looking at a different recipe. I don't have one in the back of my head to pull out as a resource for you, but it would take a different style of cooking it. And you'll want to replace, obviously, the lemon color because you won't have the egg yolks in there. That's a great question, though. Ahmad, unrelated question, but still a good one. Do I have a good quin amann recipe? I do. I don't think I have it on my website. It's definitely not on this channel, but I do have one. It is from my Set for the Holidays cookbook. And I love making quin amann. Now, there's a thought, something I could do in a live stream someday. For those who are new to that pastry, it's like making a croissant dough, except your final roll and fold of the butter, you actually roll not in flour, but sugar. And then it creates a beautiful caramelized layer, and you shape it beautifully and bake it in a ramekin or tin. And oh, it's flaky, buttery, and sweet at the same time. We've got some, oh, Cherry. Hi, Cherry. Nice to see you. Good question. So, very good point. You've made the lemon meringue pie and you get the condensation. Once it happens, I'm afraid there's no going back. You don't want to touch your meringue because it's just so fragile and delicate. The glisten is appealing, but this is where then if you really are worried about it, you could switch to a Swiss meringue. But again, I'll warn you, it can be very, very sweet. So now, this is always, always, always the most difficult part of my day is slicing the first slice of pie, especially lemon meringue pie. You know, the second one comes out fine. The first one is the trickiest. But I hope you could hear that crunch. We've got a crust that is not soggy. And I've got a very well latched pie crust. There we go. Oh, and there it is. Yum. Tart and tangy. And you can see we've got everything staying in place inside the pie plate. But as I mentioned before, because lemon juice and cornstarch don't like to hang out together, after 24 hours, you will find that a syrup leaks out of the filling and the filling contracts a little bit. It's just the nature of what those ingredients in combination do together. So as I mentioned, this is your classic North American lemon meringue pie. You've got the nice height of the meringue and it's super light and airy. Now my filling it's still actually a touch warm. It is not ice cold. So that is why I didn't get quite the clean slice I wanted. Another hour in the fridge and it would slice perfectly. But I can tell you it's going to be delicious. You can count on this recipe and I know you can do it. We've covered a lot. Pastry making, custard making, because that's what this lemon filling is, and a meringue. That lightness in the meringue is why I like the French meringue so much. And Vishal saying that they made my lemon cream tart. That's another great live stream recipe. If this style of lemon tart is not to your liking, check out my lemon cream tart, which is more your classic lemon curd. It is really something special. And hello, Tina from Melbourne. Fantastic. Oh, and Cherry's asking the question, can you use calamansi? Oh, Cherry, go for it, please. It would be delicious. This is a taste of spring for me. If you're celebrating Easter this weekend, this is a delicious, absolutely delicious dessert. Eid al-Fitr is around the corner, so another decadent dessert to celebrate. I hope you will consider making this recipe. We've got the crust, the filling, the French meringue, that tart. Oh yeah, it's a bit of a pucker. tart lemon flavor. It's no wonder that lemon meringue pie is a favorite dessert. And I know you can make it. Thank you so much for joining me today. And keep an eye on this channel because I will be posting soon what our next live stream will be. Stay well, everyone.